The awakening was not gentle, it was heavy. Zael gasped, her lungs burning as she tried to pull air into them. It felt as though an invisible hand was pressing down on her chest, pinning her to the cold metal slab beneath her. She tried to lift her arm, but it felt like lead. Her vision was blurry, swimming in shades of industrial gray and harsh, flickering yellow light. Gravity. Her mind registered through the fog of panic. The gravity is wrong, it is crushing me. She was Vailari. Her people were born on the floating cities of Stratus, a world of low gravity and thin, pristine atmosphere. They were tall, slender, and elegant, creatures of grace and intellect. But here on this slab she felt like a crushed insect. Easy, a voice rumbled. It wasn't a word, it was a tectonic shift. The sound vibrated through the metal table and into her bones. It was deep, rough, and utterly devoid of the melodic tones she was used to in the high courts. Zael forced her eyes to focus. Standing over her was a mountain. That was the only way to describe him. He was encased in armor that looked less like protection and more like the hull of a dreadnought. It was silver, scarred and pitted from 1,000 impacts reflecting the yellow emergency lights. Across the heavy chest plate, a single strip of orange paint was peeling away, like a warning sign that had survived a war. But it was the face that terrified her. He wasn't wearing a helmet. His skin was pale and weathered like old parchment left out in a storm. A thick, dark beard hid his jaw, but it couldn't hide the scar, a jagged, ugly line that ran from his left temple down to his cheek, pulling his eye slightly. He looked tired, he looked dangerous. He looked human. You are the Ronin, Zael whispered, her voice barely a squeak against the weight of the air. The giant didn't smile, he didn't bow. He simply turned away, picking up a heavy metal tool from a workbench that looked stained with grease and oil. Ronin's just a name, he grunted, his back to her. Drink this, you're dehydrated. He reached back without looking and placed a metal cup on the table next to her head. Steam rose from it, carrying a scent that made Zael's delicate nose twitch in alarm. It smelled of burnt roots and chemical stimulants. Where am I? Zael managed to ask, ignoring the cup. She tried to sit up, her muscles screaming in protest against the oppressive gravity. The last thing I remember, the slavers, the shock collars. Slavers are gone, Ronin said flatly. He was working on an exposed panel in the wall, wrenching a bolt with a force that would have snapped a Vailari's wrist. You're on the Iron Mule. My ship, the Iron Mule. The name itself sounded heavy and stubborn. Zael looked around. This wasn't a ship, it was a factory with engines. There were no sleek curves, no holographic displays, no comfort. Everything was exposed piping, riveting steel, and the constant thrumming vibration of a reactor that sounded like a caged beast. The gravity, Zael gasped, finally managing to prop herself up on her elbows. Please, it is crushing me. You must lower it. Ronin stopped working. He turned slowly, the heavy armor plate shifting with a metallic clatter. He looked at her with dark, unreadable eyes. Can't, he said, can't. Zael cried, panic rising. I am a diplomat of the Stratos Council. If I stay in this gravity, my heart will fail. I weigh 3 times my normal mass. Stabilizers are shot, Ronin explained, wiping his greasy hands on a rag that hung from his belt. If I lower the gravity below 1.5 galactic standard, the magnetic containment on the drive core destabilizes. We blow up. You die. I die. He picked up the cup of black liquid and took a long swallow. He didn't even wince at the heat. 1.5 Gs? Zael stared at him in horror. You live in this? Constantly? It keeps the bones strong, Ronin muttered. You get used to it. He didn't understand. Vailari didn't get used to high gravity. They broke under it. But as Zael looked at the human, she realized why he moved the way he did. He wasn't slow because he was clumsy. He was slow because he was dense. His muscle fibers must be wound like steel cables to function in this environment. He was a biological tank. Drink, Ronin ordered again, pointing a calloused finger at her cup. Water electrolytes. And a little sugar. It'll help with the pressure headache. Zael looked at the cup. She was terrified of him, yes. He was a Deathworlder, a species from a planet so hostile that the rest of the galaxy had quarantined it for centuries. But he had saved her. She remembered the blur of silver and orange in the slaver camp. She remembered the sound of bones breaking and the slavers screaming. He had walked through their stunfire like it was rain. She reached for the cup with trembling hands. It was heavy. Everything here was heavy. She took a sip. It was sweet, hot, and strangely comforting. "Thank you," she whispered. Ronin didn't acknowledge the thanks. He went back to the wall panel. "Don't get comfortable. We're not out of the woods yet. The slavers managed to tag the hull before we jumped. Tracking beacon." Zael nearly dropped the cup. "They are following us?" "Trying to," Ronin corrected. "I'm jamming their signal, but the mule is old. She's cranky, and she's leaking." As if on cue, a loud clang echoed through the ship, followed by a hiss that sounded like a serpent waking up. The lights in the medical bay flickered and turned a deep, ominous crimson. A siren began to wail, a low, mournful sound that grated on Zael's sensitive ears. "Warning," the ship's computer announced. The voice was female, synthetic, and completely devoid of emotion. "Atmospheric breach detected, Sector 4. Chemical coolant leak. Ventilation compromised." Ronin dropped the wrench. For a man of his size, Zael expected him to be slow. She was wrong. He moved with a terrifying, explosive speed. One moment he was at the wall. The next he was at the heavy blast door, slamming his fist into the control panel. "Isolate Sector 4, he shouted at the ceiling. "Computer, seal the vents." Unable to comply, the computer replied blandly. "Manual override required. Valve 7 Alpha is jammed." Ronin cursed, a harsh, guttural word in his native tongue that sounded like stones grinding together. He looked back at Zael. "Stay here," he barked. "Don't move." "What is happening?" Zael cried, the adrenaline momentarily overcoming the crushing gravity. She swung her legs off the table. "What is leaking?" "Ammonia," Ronin said. He said it casually, like he was talking about water. Zael's blood turned to ice. "Ammonia. Cooling line blew. Probably stress fracture from the jump." "Ammonia is a Class A neurotoxin," Zael screamed, her voice shrill with terror. "It dissolves lung tissue. It blinds. It kills in seconds." "Yeah, it's nasty stuff," Ronin agreed, checking the seal on his armor. "Stings the eyes." "Stings the—" Zael couldn't finish the sentence. A white mist began to curl under the blast door. It was heavy, clinging to the floor, rolling forward like a living thing. The smell hit her instantly, sharp, biting, overwhelming. Even that tiny whiff made her throat close up and her eyes water uncontrollably. "It's here!" Zael shrieked, scrambling back onto the table, pressing herself against the far wall. "The seal is broken. We are going to die." Ronin looked at the door. The rubber gasket was old and cracked. The white gas was pouring in faster now, filling the room with a deadly fog. He looked at Zael. She was hyperventilating. Her blue skin was turning a sickly shade of gray. If she breathed that gas, she would be dead before she hit the floor. Her delicate biology couldn't handle the toxicity. Ronin reached to his belt. He unclipped a bulky, ugly device, a filtration mask. It looked like it had been through a war, scratched and taped together, but the canister looked new. He crossed the room in 2 strides. "Put this on," he ordered, shoving the mask into her hands. Zael grabbed it like it was a lifeline. She jammed it over her face, fumbling with the straps. She pressed the seal against her skin and took a desperate, heaving breath. Clean air, filtered air. She sobbed in relief, her chest heaving. Then she froze. Through the clear visor of the mask, she looked up at Ronin. He was standing in the middle of the room. The white gas was rising, swirling around his knees, climbing toward his waist. His face was bare. "Your mask." Zael's voice was muffled by the filter, but her panic was clear. "Ronin, where is your mask?" Ronin ignored her. He turned toward the door, toward the leak. "Only had 1 spare," he muttered. "No," Zael screamed. She tried to stand, to give the mask back, but the gravity slammed her down. "You cannot, it is ammonia. It will melt your insides. You have to—" "Sit down, kid," Ronin growled. The gas was at chest height now. The room was disappearing into a whiteout. Zael knew the science, she knew the biology. No carbon-based life form could survive this concentration of ammonia without protective gear. His eyes should be boiling. His throat should be swelling shut. He should be writhing on the floor in agony. Ronin walked into the thickest part of the cloud. He stopped at a manual valve wheel on the wall near the door, the source of the secondary leak. He waved his hand in front of his face, clearing a small space in the fog. And then Zael saw it. He took a breath. A deep, frustrated breath. He didn't gag. He didn't claw at his throat. He didn't fall. He grimaced. His nose wrinkled slightly. "Smells like my ex-wife's kitchen," he muttered. Zael stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. He was breathing death. He was inhaling a chemical weapon, and he was making jokes about it. "Mask on!" she screamed again, banging on the table. "Please, why aren't you dying?" Ronin grabbed the valve wheel. It was frozen stuck, likely rusted shut or seized by the chemical reaction. "Hold your horses," he grunted. "I'm working on it." His biceps bulged under the silver armor. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. He applied force, raw, primitive, mechanical force, kriak. The metal groaned in protest. "Come on, you piece of junk," Ronin growled at the ship. He inhaled deeply again, filling his human lungs with the toxic fog to fuel his muscles. Zael watched in horrified fascination. He was a monster, a biological impossibility. He was made of something else. Not flesh and blood, but stone and fire. With a final ear-splitting screech, the valve turned. The hissing stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. The emergency scrubbers kicked into high gear, humming loudly as they began to suck the white mist out of the air. Ronin stood there, his boots planted wide, his chest heaving slightly. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his armored gauntlet. His eyes were red, irritated, watering. He coughed, a wet, hacking cough that sounded painful. But he was standing. He walked back over to the table. He picked up the rag and blew his nose loudly. "Little strong," he said, his voice raspy. "Burned the sinuses out. Saves me from buying decongestants, I guess." Zael slowly lowered the mask just an inch, testing the air. It still smelled sharp, but the lethal concentration was gone. She looked at Ronin with a mixture of awe and terror. "You," she whispered, "you are not human. You cannot be." Ronin looked at her, one eyebrow raised. He picked up his coffee cup again. "Last time I checked, I was. Earthborn. Chicago sector. But the gas..." "We use ammonia to clean our floors, Zael," Ronin said, taking a sip of the black sludge. "We dilute it, sure. But we've spent thousands of years poisoning our own planet with smog, chemicals, and radiation. We adapted. It takes more than a little bad air to put a human down." He tapped the orange stripe on his chest. "Besides," he added, his voice dropping to that low, protective rumble, "if I let a little leak stop me, who's going to get you home?" Zael felt a lump form in her throat. She had been raised to believe that strength came from purity, from intellect, from technology. But here was a creature who found strength in dirt, in poison, in endurance. "You saved me," she said softly. "You gave me the only mask." "Standard procedure," Ronin said, dismissing the heroism. "Protect the cargo, protect the passenger." He turned to the console on the wall. The red lights were still flashing, but the siren had stopped. "But we have a bigger problem," he said, his tone shifting. The tiredness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp alertness. "What problem?" Zael asked. "The leak is fixed." "That valve didn't break on its own," Ronin said. He tapped the screen, and the atmospheric sensors are picking up a discrepancy in the cargo bay. Oxygen consumption just spiked. He looked at Zael. "We have guests." Zael's heart hammered against her ribs. "Intruders, the slavers?" "Boarding party," Ronin confirmed. "They must have latched onto the hull while we were jumping. They cut the coolant line to flush us out, to make us panic." He walked over to a heavy locker built into the bulkhead. He punched in a code and the metal door hissed open. Inside was an arsenal, primitive weapons. Solid projectile throwers, kinetic shotguns, heavy, brutal tools of war that the rest of the galaxy had abandoned centuries ago for elegant energy beams. Ronin reached in and pulled out a massive double-barreled shotgun. It was black, oiled, and looked heavy enough to be a club. He grabbed a bandolier of red shells and slung it over his shoulder. Clack, clack. He racked the weapon. The sound was loud, mechanical, and final. "Zael," Ronin said, turning to face her. "Do you know how to use a weapon?" "No," she stammered. "I am a diplomat. I negotiate." "Good," Ronin said. "Then negotiate with the door. Lock it from the inside. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Where are you going?" Zael cried as he walked toward the exit. "There could be dozens of them. They have plasma rifles, shields." Ronin paused at the doorway. He looked back at her. The red emergency light cast long shadows across his scarred face. He didn't look like a diplomat. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a force of nature. "They have plasma rifles," Ronin agreed. A grim, terrifying smile touched his lips. "But I have a bad attitude and a shotgun, and I'm really not in the mood for guests." "Ronin?" Zael called out, desperation in her voice. "Please, be careful." He didn't answer. He simply stepped out into the dark, steam-filled corridor of the Iron Mule. The heavy blast door slid shut, sealing Zael inside. She was alone again, but this time the fear was different. She wasn't afraid of the monster anymore. She was afraid for the monsters who were foolish enough to board his ship. She sat in the silence, clutching the mask he had given her, the mask he had sacrificed for her. She realized then that the stories were wrong. Humans weren't Deathworlders because they killed. They were Deathworlders because they would endure anything, poison, gravity, pain, to keep their word. And Ronin had given his word that she was safe. From the corridor outside, a muffled shout echoed, followed by the terrifying, thunderous roar of a kinetic weapon. Boom. The lesson was about to begin. The sound of the blast was not just a noise, it was a physical blow. Inside the sealed medical bay, Zael flinched as the shockwave rattled the heavy blast door. The Velari were accustomed to the hum of energy weapons, clean, precise, almost musical sounds of war. This was different. This was the roar of a collapsing mountain. It was the sound of something ancient and angry. Boom, click, clack, boom. Zael pressed her hands over her sensitive ears, the mask digging into her face. She could hear other sounds now. Shouts, high-pitched shrieks of pain, and the familiar zing-zing-zing of plasma rifles returning fire. But the roaring thunder of Ronin's weapon dominated everything. It silenced the screams. It silenced the plasma. Then abruptly silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears. Zael waited, her hearts hammered against her ribs like trapped birds. Had he fallen? Had the Deathworlder finally met a limit to his biological impossibilities? She looked at the door controls. Ronin had told her not to open it. But the silence was terrifying. If he is dead, she reasoned, her diplomat's mind racing, then I am dead. The slavers will burn through this door in minutes. She had to know. Trembling, fighting the crushing gravity that made every step a labor, she moved to the door. She reached for the manual release. Her fingers hovered over the cold metal. Trust the monster, a voice whispered in her head. She pulled the lever. The door hissed open, revealing the corridor. Steam and smoke billowed in, thick and acrid. Zael coughed, grateful for the mask, and peered into the gloom. The hallway was a ruin. Paneling had been ripped from the walls. Scorch marks from plasma fire crisscrossed the ceiling like jagged black lightning. And there, standing amidst the wreckage, was Ronin. He was not dead, but he was not whole. He stood with his back to her, leaning heavily against a bulkhead. The massive shotgun hung from one hand, the barrel smoking. At his feet lay three figures, tall, armored intruders in high-tech boarding suits. Their armor, designed to deflect energy bolts, had been shattered, caved in by raw kinetic force. Ronin, Zael whispered. He turned slowly. The movement was stiff, painful. Zael gasped. The silver armor on his left side was gone, melted away by a direct plasma impact. Beneath it, his shoulder was a mess of charred fabric and angry, blistered red flesh. Blood, dark, oxygen-rich human blood, was seeping down his arm, dripping from his fingertips onto the deck plates. Drip. Drip, drip. Told you to stay inside, he rasped. His voice was tighter now, strained. You are bleeding, Zael said, stepping into the corridor, forgetting the danger. That is a plasma burn, a direct hit. Your arm, it should be useless. You should be in shock. Ronin looked down at the wound as if he had just noticed a stain on his shirt. Burned through the nerve endings, he muttered. Doesn't hurt as much as you'd think. Yet. He stepped over one of the fallen intruders. The alien groaned, trying to reach for a fallen pistol. Ronin didn't even look down. He simply stepped on the weapon, crushing it under his heavy boot with a sickening crunch of plastic and circuitry. Stay down, Ronin growled. It wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble, like a predator growling over a kill. The alien froze, staring up at the human with terrified compound eyes. What are you? The intruder hissed through a broken vocoder. That weapon, it throws rocks, primitive, barbaric. Ronin racked the slide of his shotgun one last time. Click-clack. He pointed the massive twin barrels at the alien's face. It's called lead, Ronin said. And it works. He didn't fire. He didn't need to. The intruder slumped back, fainting from the sheer proximity of such raw violence. Ronin swayed slightly. He reached out and steadied himself against the wall. A trail of blood smeared against the metal. We clear? He asked the empty air. Hostiles neutralized, the ship's computer announced. Hull integrity at 84%. Atmospheric scrubber sat 90%. Good, Ronin grunted. He looked at Zael. Grab the medkit from the locker. The red one, not the blue one. Blue is for engines, red is for people, usually. 10 minutes later on the bridge of the Iron Mule, Ronin sat in the pilot's chair, stripped to the waist. The air was clear enough now that Zael had removed her mask, though the metallic tang of blood filled the small space. Zael stood beside him, clutching the red metal box. Her hands shook. She had seen injuries before, Diplomatic guards struck by stray fire, pilots injured in crashes. But Velari medicine was elegant. Nanite gels, dermal regenerators, pain-nullifying fields. Ronin didn't have nanites. He had a bottle of amber liquid, a curved metal needle, and a spool of black thread. Pour, Ronin ordered, gesturing to the bottle. Zael hesitated. This is fuel. Whiskey, Ronin corrected. Earth antiseptic and painkiller. Mostly antiseptic. He took a swig from the bottle, grimaced, and then nodded at his shoulder. Pour it, don't be shy. Zael uncorked the bottle and tipped it over the angry, weeping wound on his shoulder. The liquid hit the raw flesh. Hiss. Ronin's entire body went rigid. The muscles in his back knotted like twisted ropes. His hand gripped the armrest of the pilot's chair so hard that the metal groaned and warped under his fingers. He squeezed his eyes shut, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. But he didn't scream, he didn't pull away. Why? Zael cried, pulling the bottle back. Why do you not use a suppressor? I can feel your pain radiating off you. It is barbaric, Ronin exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. He opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, watery, but focused. Pain is information, Zael, he said, his voice rough. It tells you what's broken. It tells you you're still fighting. He picked up the needle. He had already threaded it. Zael watched in horrified fascination as he positioned the needle over the jagged tear in his skin. You cannot mean to. He pushed the needle through his own flesh. Zael had to look away. She felt nauseous. The idea of manually repairing a biological organism with textiles was something out of a horror story. It was crude, it was messy. It was undeniably effective. Watch the monitors, Ronin said through gritted teeth as he pulled the thread tight. Keep an eye on the sensors. If their mothership is out there, I need to know before I finish sewing myself back together. Zael forced herself to look at the screens. She typed in commands, her fingers flying over the interface. Sensors are clear for now, she reported, her voice trembling. They must have thought the boarding party would succeed. They are waiting for a signal. They're going to be waiting a long time, Ronin grunted. He continued to stitch, needle in, needle out, tie the knot. It was a rhythm of survival. Tell me, Zael said softly, watching his reflection in the dark monitor. Is it true what they say about your people? Depends on what they say, Ronin replied, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead with his good arm. That you come from a death world. A Class 12 planetary hazard, high gravity. Unstable tectonic plates, solar radiation. Predators that hunt for sport. Ronin chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. Earth, yeah. She's a rough mother. Tries to kill you from the day you're born. Winters that freeze your blood, summers that boil your brain. Viruses, bacteria, hurricanes. He tied off the final knot and bit the thread with his teeth to cut it. He inspected his handiwork. It was ugly, puckered, and angry red. But the bleeding had stopped. We didn't evolve to be the strongest, Ronin said, picking up a rag to wipe the blood from his arm. We didn't evolve to be the fastest. We evolved to be the most stubborn things in the galaxy. He stood up, wincing as the fresh stitches pulled tight. He walked over to Zael. He towered over her, a battered giant of flesh and bone. He reached out and gently took the mask from her hand, the mask she was still clutching like a talisman. You kept it safe, he said. It kept me safe, Zael corrected. She looked up into his scarred face. You gave it to me. You walked into the poison without it. Why? Ronin shrugged. I'm the captain. You're the passenger, that's the deal. No, Zael said firmly. That is not just a deal, that is honor. She reached out and tentatively touched the silver plating of his armor, right over the orange stripe. What does this mean, she asked. This color, I have seen it on your chest. On the walls, Ronin looked down at the orange stripe. His expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes relaxing for a brief moment. On Earth, he said quietly, orange is the color of rescue. It means I am here to help. It means hold on, I'm coming. He looked at Zael. It means you're not alone in the dark. Zael felt a tear slide down her cheek. She had spent her life in the high courts of Stratos, surrounded by beings of light and energy, discussing philosophy and art, but she had never felt safe, not truly. There was always political intrigue, betrayal, the polite cruelty of the elite. Here on this rusting, leaking bucket of bolts standing next to a bleeding monster who drank poison and sewed his own skin, she felt invincible. Ronin, she said. Yeah? I think I would like to try the coffee now. Ronin laughed. It was a real laugh this time, deep and booming. It chased the shadows away from the corners of the bridge. Careful, kid, he said, turning back to the pilot's console. That stuff will put hair on your chest, and I don't think that's the look you're going for." He sat down, the chair groaning under his weight. He punched in the coordinates for the nearest jump gate. The engines of the Iron Mule roared to life, a vibration that Zael could feel in her teeth. "Strap in," Ronin commanded. "Gravity's gonna kick a bit when we hit FTL." Zael sat in the co-pilot seat. She buckled the harness. She looked at the mask on her lap, then at the human beside her. Let the galaxy send its slavers. Let them send their plasma rifles and their high-tech fleets. Let them send their poisons and their threats. She had a human. And as the stars stretched into lines of infinite light, Zael realized something that the rest of the galaxy had yet to learn. The most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the one with the biggest gun. It's the one who can take the hit, smile, and keep coming. She watched Ronin take another sip of his black poison, check his stitches, and lean back. "Next stop, Stratos," he said. "Let's get you home." Zael smiled. She was already home.